Hello, my name's Trevor. I'm a sound and energy healer and also the host of this podcast series. And if you're interested in this podcast and like the other podcast, then please don't forget to subscribe and you'll be notified of the new ones that are coming out. So today we've got a special guest. His name is Ewan Nicholson, and we're going to talk about healing childhood trauma. Ewan is a full-time trauma recovery coach, and he's talking to us today from Spain. So hello, Ewan.
Hello, Trevor. How are you doing in sunny England? Good?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm doing good. It's not exactly
Yeah.
sunny today. It's
Yeah.
it's more like, yeah, it's not sunny. It's very rainy today.
Overcast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
well,
very rainy.
it's to be expected. It is Britain.
Yeah. So I've known you. Our connection is I've known you a few years, but we kind of bumped shoulders at various events when I lived in
Yeah.
Spain, and we've kept in contact. And yeah, but we don't keep that much in contact, so it's always good to know what you're up to at the moment, and yeah, it's good to know that you're doing the work that you're doing. So could you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got into
Sure.
it, really?
Okay. I'll give you the abridged version of I won't give you the 7 hour version of how I
Okay.
got to I
Yeah,
got
true.
to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll give you the 5 minute version. I do trauma recovery coaching. So I help and support people in recovering from childhood trauma in a kind of therapeutic sense. And I arrived at it like a lot of healers, or a lot of people involved in the industry from really my own journey and my own healing process.
Mhm.
I grew up in a family where there was sexual and physical abuse. And I spent my 20s probably just, conveniently pretending that didn't happen. My 30s struggling with the fact that happened. My 40s really coming to grips with, what had really happened. And during that process, I developed some pretty serious addiction issues. My brother developed schizophrenia and ended up killing himself. And all of that accumulated probably around about 7 years ago, where I decided, look, it's time to address what's being unaddressed or what's been suppressed or unhealed. And as part of that process, I started my own healing journey through lots of different ways and means. And I've got to a point now where, I feel like I've got enough knowledge or insight or understanding of that process where I really like to help other people get to a better place, because it's very painful, and it's a dark place you can end up when you don't address these issues. And yeah, I think it's something that's probably underserved in our community. I think there are a lot of people with childhood trauma, and part of the process of having childhood trauma is not wanting to have it and wanting to put it under and suppress it. And we live in a culture that provides a lot of means and mechanisms to suppress trauma, from addiction to substances to work to devices to a lot of different things. If you want to push things down, there's a lot of
Mhm.
ways to do that. But it's a catch-22. The more you push it down, the more it comes back, and the
Yeah.
more it comes up in it with force in some ways. And it's not until your life probably ends up in some kind of difficulty that you start thinking, okay, there's something here I need to address. Something's not working. And that's where I got to. And I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress, but I'm definitely at a better place than I used to be, for sure.
Yeah, it's yeah. I'm sorry about your brother.
Mm.
It's. Was there a point there where you heard this voice saying there's something wrong here, you need to deal with this, but you never followed through? What was the point that where you actually went, that's enough now, I really need to, or was it a gradual process?
I probably went, that's enough, like regularly for years, like that's
Yeah.
enough. No, it's not enough. That's enough. And there's an expression that when you think you hit rock bottom, you can find a trap door and you just keep going worse. It probably did start getting echoed back in my relationships, so particularly with my wife, where there was like, this is too much. This is I can't handle much more. So I think that ability to be in denial just gets harder and harder and harder. And that's why often for a lot of people, dealing with trauma can come in their 30s or 40s, because there's a long history of just things not working. So there was probably not like a singular moment, but an accumulation of moments where I just couldn't pretend the way I used to that I don't have issues. And I think particularly with addiction, when you get to a certain point in of self-destruction, where you start feeling like why am I doing this? Like I'm really destroying myself actively and consciously, there must be something going on. And you kind of have a blurry sense of what it is. But the catch-22 with addiction is if you're drunk all the time or high all the time, then you're never sober enough to kind of let whatever it is arise. So you kind of know it's there in a vague, blurry sense, but you're drunk enough, often enough, or you have periods of sobriety that aren't long enough to really let it percolate up and let it arise. So there's a vague sense of, like, I know I have an issue, but I'll deal with it another day and just keep pushing under. So yeah, probably around 40, I ended up in psychiatric ward. I ended up having a kind of breakdown, and that was probably like a turning point in my healing process. Because I remember being in a psych ward thinking, how do I get out? Because I got stuck. I admitted myself voluntarily, and then they wouldn't let me out. This is in Malta. I was living in Malta. And I said to my wife at the time, like, how do I get out? And she said, like, how did you get in here? Like, don't worry about how you get out. How have you ended up here? And these are all accumulative points. I can think of moments that were more poignant, but it was really an accumulation of my ability to deny my pain, and the dysfunctionality that arose from that pain became harder and harder and harder, to the point where it's like, either I'm going to deal with this or I'm probably going to die.
Yeah, I can. I've also been in a psychiatric ward, but I was actually one of the nurses. But my first real long-time girlfriend was when I was 21, and I'd never really identified mental illness before. And she introduced me to a mother who was manic depressive. And then she developed, over the 4 years that I was seeing her, manic depression, and to a point where she was actually sectioned. And I followed the whole process as a witness, as a participant. I was actually involved in seeing things that happen around me, and understand what it's like as a family member, as a someone who's close to, is in a relationship. And when went into the psychiatric ward, seeing, the first thing I saw was a doctor and a nurse carrying this naked man past me, screaming, going, "Ah!" And I'm like, it was just something out of the Victorian times.
Yeah.
And you're like, the things you're seeing there are just, I mean, literally, I couldn't believe it. And I was shocked, to say the least. But I also saw the way that medication is used, and in her case, it was necessary to bring her back into a safe place. And we talked about this on episode 2 about psychosis and shamanic work, and there's things like that, which there's all these different tools that kind of work. But I think it's depending on what environment you're in, and like you were saying, you were kind of found yourself stuck in there. It makes you wonder how many people don't have that family support, because usually they alienate themselves when they go through this destructive behavior, and that are still in there now, that are still stuck in that space.
Yeah.
So what would you?
I spent years because my brother had schizophrenia. So before he killed himself, he had 8 years of being in and out of psychiatric wards. And my observation of that experience of being in locked wards and having long periods of time, 9 months, 6 months in psychiatric wards, is they're places just full of human pain, human suffering. And when people are defined as a mental illness or this is a chemical imbalance, what's neglected is their story, their history, their narrative. But what I see is psychiatric wards are just full of humans, people in despair and people struggling in their suffering. But if you box someone as just having a mental illness, then it's easy to negate that suffering. So for my brother, of all the things we went through as a schizophrenic patient, he was never asked about our family history. He was never asked about what happened to him as a child, because that diagnosis precluded that as being an issue. So to me, I think there are a lot of people with unresolved childhood trauma in psychiatric wards and addiction facilities, and mental illness, I think, at its root is a way of coping with trauma, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I know they talk about transference and where things happen in regards to the therapist and the patient, but a lot of the people that I kind of worked with, or even the consultants, I'm not saying this generally that everyone's like this, but they didn't communicate. They just saw them as a prescription, and
Yeah.
or they saw them as a, okay, well, this is my job, I'm going to get paid for doing this. And then there are genuine people in there that are really so caring, but again, they are trapped by the system themselves. There's certain things that they would perhaps like to try that would be beneficial, but there's so much red tape, and then you go into the fact that pharmaceuticals are involved, and there's lots of, and I think psychiatric has been a long time in developing, whereas other parts of the health industry has had investment, and I think there's been a lot of stigma attached to it. So people, it's been a secret. And like one of the great things that like celebrities like Tyson Fury, the world championship boxer, saying about how depressed he was, and coming out and saying, look, A, I'm a man, and B, I'm a celebrity, and I'm a fit person, but I wasn't, and look how he's achieved what he's done. I think, and I know childhood trauma for everyone is terrible, but I think there needs to be even more emphasis on men, and especially when it's connected to sexual abuse, because there's always that something we don't want to speak about, something that's frowned upon, and that manifests itself in the behavior in them, for them to either, if it's unresolved, they can become abusers, or they can become destructive or violent or whatever. So yeah, it's there's still a lot of work to do, and it's great that you're out there giving your message out and explaining your story. So if you say about childhood trauma, what defines trauma? What do you think defines trauma?
Well, I think there's a basic understanding that trauma is when there's been some kind of moral, psychological, emotional injury that's occurred within childhood that has a lasting effect on adulthood. So look, we can all go through difficult experiences. We can lose a dog we love, maybe our parents divorce, and that can leave an injury for some people, and it can just be neither here nor there. Obviously, everyone's very different. So there isn't necessarily a measurable thing of this defines trauma, like these acts define trauma, but there is a broad understanding that if you've been beaten, sexually abused, neglected, that leaves a lasting psychological injury, and that shows up later on often. And they're now discovering it's not just psychological, it changes our physiology, it changes our nervous system, it changes our biology. So there was a landmark study done, I don't know how long ago, 30 years ago, called the ACE study, which covered adverse childhood experiences. And they did a longitude test on about 35,000 people, I think, more or less. Those numbers may not precise. And they asked them 10 questions, basically, about sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, a couple other things. And what they discovered is, first of all, sexual abuse was far more prevalent than they understood. So it was 1 in 6 boys, 1 in 4 girls that suffered from some kind of sexual abuse in childhood. There was emotional abuse, physical abuse, and the group they did was a middle-class group in America. So it wasn't sort of on the fringes of the underclass or poor. This is like white picket fence America. You have this deeply malaise of trauma. But what was astounding about the findings is they discovered that if you had a score of 6, 7, you had a large ACE score, the predictability of emphysema, cardiovascular disease, all sorts of biological and physical problems arose. So they're able to make a direct relationship between stress in childhood and physical health. And they've always understood that, okay, there's probably a greater probability you could end up an alcoholic, or you could end up depressed, or you could end up with mental illness. But they weren't really clear about the fact that when you're in childhood and you're hit regularly or you're neglected, that changes your nervous system. It changes your biology fundamentally. So that's, trauma is a series of things or 1 or 2 things or a series of things that leaves a lasting effect into your adult life. Yeah,
and I've kind of, there's different levels of trauma. There's a child losing its iPhone. There's the dog dying. That's a different one. But I've also been I've also been discovering that even a child left to cry, below the age of 2, they equate the fact that, okay, actually, it's me that's at fault. and internalize it.
Yeah.
And there's that trauma,
Yeah.
that inability to emotionally connect or process things. And my own journey is it started when I really started to learn about hypnotherapy. And then I read books and I got interested in psychology. And then I started going, hang on a minute, I'm seeing patterns here. Patterns in the way my brother acts, patterns in the way my family acts, patterns in myself. And I remember, I remember just one day just bursting into emotional upset, just started crying. And I didn't even know why, but there was something coming up from my unconscious. And my dad was not sexually abusive to me, but he was very physically abusive. As in, I say very, I mean, he didn't used to beat us with a belt, but, being slapped, with the palm of the hand. I still remember the shock to the system. And it's also the detachment from love as well. It's like someone that you want their love, but they're giving you violence, and then you have that connection with, so that's happening to your nervous system. It's happening to your psychology, and then you do stuff like it'd be mental cruelty. His own insecurities going, oh, you look like a little girl today, and what's the point of doing this, and why doing that? And over the years, you start thinking, as an adult, this is what I explain to my clients, is that, look, it's like, from an intellectual adult point of view, it's like, well, we know that was wrong. But from a child's perspective, the energy, is still in the system. The pain is still in the system. And there's still, you're still acting from that belief system. And that's a lot of the work that I do, is energetically clearing that from people, and for them to understand that. So I see the patterns, and I also have been unraveling the patterns within myself, as you have. And I mean, it probably is the best way to learn from experience. It's you've got such a motivation to learn. You've got such a motivation to uncover, and in doing so, that's kind of how you heal other people. But it's always funny when you get a group of people that have been in trauma, because they have this trauma competition. My trauma is bigger than your competition, and my trauma is bigger than your trauma, and they say, well, and it's that one-upmanship, and they almost own it as part of their identity, and they're proud of it, and that's so. It's so have you studied lots of? Has this been a journey that you've made yourself, or you've gone, well, I need to study this book, or is it just things that's coming to your awareness on your journey?
It's probably a combination of things. I mean, I did a formal certification as a trauma recovery coach. That was like a formal qualification. But probably more than anything, my own process, really. And then, I've always been interested in spirituality, from a very kind of young age, of meditation and religion and things like that. But I think probably what happened as well is I realized I was using that as a bit of a spiritual bypass, or, I was wanting to be one with the universe rather than just heal my own pain. So I've kind of circled back around to my spirituality a bit. But to do that, I had to go through this process of just understanding my pain and understanding, the very things that you're talking about, the internalization of shame, the internalization of negative voices. And like you said, sometimes trauma is what happens, and then it's also what doesn't happen. If you're not given love or you're not given validation, you assume there's something wrong with you. You internalize that, and then you grow up feeling like, I hate myself, and I don't know why. I've not strangled a kitten or done anything sort of like worthy of this self-hatred, but here I am really loathing myself, and I can't locate it. I can't locate it to something I've done. But as you go back, you realize, well, if you don't feel that love, and that love isn't mirrored in your childhood, then you just assume you're not worthy of it, or there's something wrong with you, and you carry that. So for me, my education process has really just mostly been my own healing process. And then, you read, you integrate that. There's a lot of modern stuff coming out. There's a lot of modern methods, somatic methods that have helped me. And then, and then you also get to a point, I'm sure you've had that as well, where you read so many things that you also realize, well, I need to do some of the work. I just can't be constantly reading books about myself. Like I need to start doing practically what's required for that healing to occur. Because I think you can also get a little bit fixated on the next book or the next YouTube video, there's something out there that's got the answers, and if I can just find that thing, I'll be better. And so there's been a process of acquiring knowledge, but also kind of at some point letting go as well.
Yeah, like yourself, I've spent lots of money. God, man, it's like Tony Robbins. Okay, let's do that. Date with Destiny. It's Joe Dispenza. Let's do that.
Yeah.
2 courses Joe Dispenza. And then
there's a lot out there. There's a lot out there.
Shamanic stuff.
Everyone's selling something.
Plant medicines. Let's do that. Let's go to the Amazon and do that. And then what else? Let's do a hypnotherapy course. And you think, God, man. And I've had a couple of therapists as well, and then the spiritual awakening, which is, but I do notice there's a pattern in all these, from the psychiatry to the spirituality to working with your shadow, as they say, whatever it is, it's all energy. It's all energy. It's about, that's what I feel, and it's tapping into them pockets, or it's information. It's tapping into those pockets of information, and then being able to sort of consciously look at that from a different perspective, and maybe okay, I get this now. I understand what the lesson is from this, and forgiveness. And forgiveness, not just from here, but forgiveness from another perspective, and then allowing the healing, giving permission for the healing to occur. And I believe that we choose our situations, as dreadful as they may be. We choose them on a higher level, for us to learn things, and in doing so many times, is that as we go through this process, that gives us the motivation and the skill set to sit with other people and to start healing other people, saying, you know what, I've not just come out of college. My certificate is the fact that I've been where you're sat, and I'm now at the other side of the tunnel, and if you listen to me, I can guide you. And that's to help alleviate their suffering in some way, is the goal, I think, of everyone. I think one of the things, like Viktor Frankl did Man's Search for Meaning, and it's a great book. And I think what we take from that is the fact that if you can find meaning in whatever it is, even the worst things that happen, then that's when you're on the road to recovery. That's a really good way to start going, okay, I can find meaning and I get a purpose out of this, then I've got something to go at. But it's a hard journey, and so.
And I think you're right. There's a hope required, and I think one of the things that people with childhood trauma can end up feeling, and I certainly felt that, there's a kind of despair that can set in, which is, I'm broken, I'm damaged, I'm unable to change. I've had years and years of trying to get better and not been able to achieve it, and I'm just built this way. And it can be you can feel a lot of despondency when you go to change and you can't, and you keep repeating the same patterns, you keep having the same bad relationships, you keep having the same addiction cycles. So that quest for hope and faith and trust that we can change, that it is possible with the right amount of support, the right amount of love, the right amount of tools and understanding, I think is a message that, I definitely would like to share with people, that it's not in a corny sense that it can get better, but just in the sense that, I guess it is in a corny sense that it can get better, but this feeling that, not in a kind of toxic positivity that just look on the bright side, but just this sense of, by being present with our pain, by being honest about our pain, we kind of get over our pain, through our pain. And I think that's a tricky bit to balance, that you don't want to be consumed by it. But in my experience, healing childhood trauma, there's less of a danger of being consumed by it and more of a danger of denying it, because it's painful to see not only this happened, but I'm responsible. I have a responsibility, like an agency, to deal with this, and I don't know if I can, so I don't. And it can be very tricky to balance to see the pain, but also try to develop compassion for the pain. And it takes time. It takes time to be able to get to that place.
And it's when you're in that situation, sometimes you can get a distorted view of what reality is, because if you'd agree that the fact that the type of people that you surround yourself with, the type of belief systems that you start incorporating, they act as the cement that keeps you in that reality. So when you try to move away from it, you're not, you're no longer in your comfort zone. Even though it's uncomfortable, you'd rather be there than be looked down upon by somebody else or some other type of environment that you move into. And that's the environment that really needs to help you. And
exactly.
So
and people see that in relationship issues where
yeah,
men or women say, look, I really want a loving relationship. I really want someone to love me. And then they manage to attract someone to love them. And then they sabotage it. They can't handle it. It's just too much. So they find ways to get out of it. They find ways to block it, because the idea of being loved can actually, the reality of it can feel very scary for people. So they find ways to, because they're associating love with pain. So there's all these processes that you just have to kind of keep trying and failing and come to this realization that these people, these situations aren't in my best interest, and I need to make decisions that align themselves more with that healing process. And sometimes, particularly with childhood trauma, disengaging from family, setting boundaries with family, cutting off from family if necessary, can be very painful. I know it was for me, because you feel guilty. You feel like, and that's one of the issues, it's like, I shouldn't complain. It wasn't really that bad. Someone else had it worse. I was just toughening me up. You have these ways of like to say, well, this was dysfunctional. I was unloved. There's a guilt that goes with that. So to step away from people's family, I think, is definitely an element that's quite difficult for people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't recognize the signs of trauma. They just presume that, oh, well, this is the way it is. And when you talk about relationships there, which is one of the most important aspects of our lives, relationships are also the greatest teacher as well. It's where as Tom Campbell would say, where the rubber hits the road, and it's like you think you're sorted, and then you get in a relationship, and it's like, actually, I'm not. And I've seen quite a lot of clients, a lot of people I've known where, they're a woman who say has been very abused as a child, and she'll grow up and she'll have an abusive relationship, and then they'll end the abusive relationship, and they'll go out with their friends, and they'll just pick a guy in the room they find attractive and go, he ends up being somebody else who abuses them. And you're like, how do you pick the same one? Because unconsciously we're going, this is who I deserve. This is who I deserve. And it's strange. It's incredible how we call it energy, we call it unconscious communication, how we manipulate our lives, and we orchestrate these events subconsciously. So I think becoming conscious of the moment, becoming conscious of how you're thinking, how you're feeling, even if you don't understand why you're feeling at that moment, what you're feeling or why you're doing it, but going, hang on a minute. I got to a point, I was in the Lake District and I was sat by this river, and my life had gone crap again. And I'm always wanting to do good things, but it just ended up just crap every time. Like, why is my life going wrong? And I couldn't blame anyone else, because I went, what's the one consistent factor that's contributing to this going wrong? And I went, oh, it's me. Then it was like, okay, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing? And that's the point. When you stop pointing your fingers, there's that famous saying that, when you point your fingers at someone else, there's three pointing back at you. And it's that self-introspection. And that you mentioned about responsibility, the ability to respond. And to believe that you can actually change it. I think having that belief that, you know what, I can actually do something about this. And then either being supported or being given the information by someone like yourself, and this is how you do it. So I think there's a lot of people out there that are in trauma that don't even realize they're in trauma. They just think this is the way relationships are. This is the way my life is,
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is where crisis comes in, where we have this process of where it just gets harder and harder to deny. Because if you spoke to me in my 20s and said, how was your childhood? I'd said, my childhood was fine. And then my 30s, I'm starting to think, maybe it wasn't. Maybe there's some issues here I need to deal with. And then so it gets to a point where it becomes unmanageable. So, and like you said, there is this awareness that, how did I get here? Like, how do I keep making the same bad decisions, attracting the same problems? And I am the common denominator. And that awareness that my unconscious is determining my life, is hard. And I think particularly for trauma survivors to say, how do I take responsibility without taking blame? How do I say, well, I've got this necessity to deal with my pain without saying, well, I'm to blame for what happened. And what happened in my childhood wasn't my fault. But coming to grips with, and I really don't like that. I really find that statement. You may not have been to blame for your trauma, but you are responsible for healing it. I don't like that, the way that's framed. But in essence, that sense of how do we take responsibility, but at the same time not carry the burden of blame, and that is particularly tricky. I mean, it's doable because it has to be, but I think it's a hard mix to find.
Well, yeah, and I think now with the increase of the information available on the internet, it's never been easier to find things, but it's never been harder to find things because there's so much noise out there. And some people that have come to my mind is Gabo Mate, who uses ayahuasca and various techniques for addictions. He does some incredible work. There's a lot of the traditional sort of health industry that frowns upon that sort of thing, but at the end of the day, the results work, and he's doing some incredible work. And Peter Levine as well, he's done some great books. Like it's The Body Keeps Count. Body Keeps Score, and it's like, so I think there's some. What the good thing about the internet is that people are able to connect. The good ideas are being able to connect with people, and also you can access information without having to show up at a psychiatric hospital, or you can do it anonymously, and people can reach out to people and in different ways now. So I think it's a really good way that the things have developed. So it's a hopeful idea. It's an optimistic future when it regards to people being able to connect with people like yourself. So you'd agree that there are people out there that are in trauma that don't realize they're in trauma, and such as addictions, relationships, repetitive cycles of destructive behavior. They're all signs of this, what you'd say is childhood.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I couldn't say that in 100% sense, but I think it's very likely that if you end up a sex worker with a heroin addiction living on the street, then there's a very, very strong probability that there's been sexual abuse, or you end up with severe depression or anxiety. That these things don't occur in vacuums. That there's context to our pain, and then in addition to that, we live in a society that is not geared towards healing and compassion and kindness. It's a very heartless world we live in. It's driven by economics and profit, that our social structures are set up to extract profit and money. So it's very easy that even with some mild trauma, you can end up alienated. People end up living in flats on their own. They end up working in jobs they hate with people they don't get on well with, and they're expected to be happy. And then if, in addition to that, you've had a tough childhood, or you've had a childhood that's lacked love and care, and you live in a society that lacks love and care, and you end up in a job you hate, living in a flat in a concrete jungle, going to work every day on the tube, and all you have is what? And so people end up sad and miserable and anxious, and why wouldn't they? This is not an environment that produces happiness. It's not meant to, because people's unhappiness is profitable. To create environments where people are re-traumatized and their anxiety is heightened. So on one level, we're at a culture that heightens anxiety and depression, and then offers the remedies in the form of drugs, alcohol, smartphones, distractions. So there's a cycle that occurs. So I would say that we're in the mental illness and addiction field is full of unaddressed childhood trauma. But part of this sort of collective shadow is to really acknowledge that 1 in 4 children, 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused. That's tough. I've spoken to people about that. They don't believe it. They just don't think it's possible. 1 in 6 boys. The amount of women that I know that have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted as adults, it's just astronomical.
Yeah, me too.
So what culture produces those outcomes? That's not an individual pedophile who's out there going around, raping and molesting children, 86% of the time, it's a family member, an uncle, a father, a parent, a stepfather, a friend of the family. So this is occurring within normal, inverted commas, society.
Yeah.
And I think for people to really recognize that is to recognize we are in an extremely degenerated, dysfunctional world. And that's hard because we want to feel we're the apex of civilization. We're at the top of the technological pyramid. Here we are. Look at everything. But the reality is we're a deeply psychologically wounded and traumatic society that's re-traumatizing people over and over.
Yeah, and it's I think the way the entertainment industry, you get places like Netflix, and the way they trivialize these things. They have it in cartoons, they have it in movies, and it's trying to just make it more acceptable for people, desensitize it, make it more, oh, well, that's just the way it is. And, it's we see patterns in people, and the amount of clients that come to me, you see it. You don't know what's happened, but you go, I can see the effects of, when something happened. And I'm not an expert in psychology at all, but the energetic imprint that it leaves on them, the symptoms, and you can feel it, for better sense of the word, and you can say, well, what happened here? And it's just calamity after calamity, and you're like, wow. So but there is hope. You do get to a point. Was there a few times in your experience where you thought this is it, or a few times when you think, I was lucky to get out of that or to survive that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think first of all, in childhood, you are trapped, and that's part of where you end up just disassociating or just cutting off because there is no cavalry coming. But, particularly if the abuse is within a family home. So there's a kind of a hopelessness that just kicks in, and you adapt. You have to, because on one hand you've got someone abusing you, on the other hand you're having breakfast with them. And it's complicated because that person abusing you love, you want them to love you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're hurting you. So it's very kind of complicated. So that experience itself is difficult, or it's like you just work around that. But then as an adult, when you kind of get to the point you feel like, I need to deal with this trauma. Like I need to deal with it. And what you think is a little hill of trauma, once you eventually the fog clears from your addictions, you realize it's a mountain of trauma. It's an Everest of trauma. That's how it can feel. And the whole idea of scaling it or getting on top of it or dealing with it can become very, it can be difficult to feel like, can I do this? But you do, you manage one step at a time. And as you do, you start to make small gains, and what felt like a giant mountain shrinks a little. And it's not that it goes away, but it becomes manageable. You can live with it. And I think particularly the last few years, I felt a lot more hope, more love, and more serenity, and that these processes do, I don't feel like healing trauma is just about being less screwed up or being less miserable. At the end of the day, I have embarked on this journey to feel joy and to feel serenity and to feel connection with people and to feel I like my life. I love my life. I love my friends, my family, and to feel joy and hope and trust. So I think, but there's a window of time where I definitely felt that was going to be out of reach for me. That was not something I could ever feel.
Yeah, and that experience of joy and love is. Would you agree that the first step is to find ways to love yourself? It's like once you start connecting to like yourself, to love yourself at some level, to forgive yourself for feeling the shame and everything else that goes with the experience.
I probably have to fake it till I make it type thing. Like I get it. Like I've read a lot about self-love, and self-love can become another thing that I have to do because I'm screwed up. Like I got to start jogging, I got to lose weight, I got to meditate, and I got to love myself. And I'm not loving myself, and I should be loving myself. And why don't I love myself? No. So I start hating myself about hating myself. So in a sense, I'm just not, I don't know what that feels like. It's just a conceptual, abstract idea. So I think there are ways towards it that don't necessarily say, I got to love myself. Letting people love me is an act of loving myself. Doing things that don't destroy me is an act of loving myself. And little by little, as I learning to sit with my feelings is an act of loving myself. So there are definitely small acts that aren't necessarily like generating a feeling of self-love or letting myself love others. And little by little, that I've been able to kind of reintegrate that as a love for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But that for me was probably a little bit further down the track, because to begin with, it's just, I don't even know. I mean, I know what you mean. I should love myself, but I don't know. I don't get it. It's just conceptual.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I suppose when somebody's in that initial stage where they say, I need to speak up, I need to ask for help, that can be very scary, because I know lots of different situations where people have gone, this person abused me, and the family members don't believe them. Their own family members don't believe them. And that brings more shame to themselves, and it's more hurt and more, trauma. And so, but the necessity to speak out when you're in that situation, to a place that's safe, that you trust, I think that's really important. If somebody's going through, either gone through or going through, or in an environment like that, what would you suggest they do?
Look, I think you're right. Because I think the word you use is very important: safety. Emotional safety, and to feel, because childhood trauma is essentially a sense of lived unsafeness, where you feel afraid just regularly. The fear is baked into your system. So the issue of how do I feel before I can love myself, before I can feel hope and all these things, how do I just feel safe in my body, in my environment, just with myself? So if you're at a point where you feel like I need to reach out or I need to do something, I think to expect someone to do that and not have any network of support, family, friends, or some people, one person I think that's difficult. So I think reaching out to people, connecting, whether it's through a therapist, whether it's through a meditation group, whether it's a community, I think the first thing is making connections to feel like there are people here that can support me, and the people that I can trust and that I feel safe with. So I think making connections is a big part of that. And then I think the thing you mentioned before about men, I think the age of disclosure of sexual abuse is a lot later for men. It takes men a lot longer to acknowledge that. For all the various cultural, social reasons, men tend to hold things in. So I think for men to kind of reach out and connect with friends, but in my experience, my friends, when I shared and disclosed what's happened to me, have been very supportive. And friends that I know that have gone through similar things and open up to their friends are very supportive. So I think we can also be surprised that there are people who care about us, but we're afraid to reach out to them. We feel embarrassed, or we feel a lot of shame. So I think the other thing is sometimes we underestimate how much people care about us. And when we share, my experience most of the time, people support us. People are there for us. And if they're not, then I think you have to find ways to make connections where they can be. And for a lot of people, it is just a therapist. If you don't have any network of support, then to begin with, a therapist can be that support.
And just sharing that experience with one person, your first person, can be liberating and
life-changing. Exactly.
Yeah, and another thing to mention is that when you have low self-esteem, when you have low self-respect, the type of friends, as we mentioned earlier, that you surround yourself with are usually, either not that good of a friend, or they've gone through their own trauma. So trauma attracts trauma. And it's sometimes trying to break away from that can be really hard, because they don't want you to get out of their trauma. If they don't want you to succeed. So it's like, they can sabotage you as well, as apart from yourself sabotaging. So it is a very complicated place. And you talked about, you mentioned about healing, and could you explain what the somatic approach is in regards to healing childhood trauma?
Well, like you mentioned, the body keeps score. There's a book, The Body Remembers. There's Peter Levine stuff that in the last 15 years, there's been a kind of a development understanding of childhood trauma that is body based. So they call it top down, bottom up. And so it's seeing if trauma is lodged in the body, if trauma is lodged in the nervous system, then addressing childhood trauma isn't just a cognitive, psychological, and emotional process. It also has a physiological element to it, that our bodies are nervous, our bodies are frightened. So how do we regulate our nervous system?
Mm-hmm.
How do we quieten our nervous system? How do we feel serenity in our body? So there are methodologies that have been developed. There's one called trauma release exercises. There's a protocol called Safe and Sound Protocol, which is developed by Stephen Porges through polyvagal theory. There's Peter Levine's somatic experiencing. So, and there is yoga and neurofeedback. There's various things that have been developed that are focused more on the nervous system, quietening the nervous system, and using that as a platform to say, you still have talk therapy, there is still emotional, psychological things to understand, but there's a foundation in place, which is a more relaxed body, and mindfulness can be part of that as well. So as a trauma recovery coach, I would see that as an essential piece in helping people come to grips with their childhood trauma. And I had that experience myself, that I could intellectually understand something, but my body was still in a constant state of nervousness and agitation and stress. And as I was able to kind of quieten my body down and relax more in my body, the need to use the compulsion to drink started to soften a bit, because a lot of it, we're just unconsciously developing ways to feel better. Like, I'm feeling anxious. Yeah, change our state. And it works. You take 5 beers, you smoke a joint, you do these things. Guess what? I am relaxed. I mean, it does temporarily, superficially work. So there is an intelligence to addiction in the sense of that it does kind of work. It does soften things. It just ends up with its own problems, et cetera, et cetera. But so it's like, so the impulse is correct, but how do we do it in a way that doesn't create additional, secondary problems that end up bigger than the actual problem that you're trying to deal with? And that's what they've now developed, or they're developing. And it's a new area, like relative to human history, but there's a lot of really interesting practices. And the 2 ones I've worked with is trauma release exercises and the Safe and Sound Protocol. And I've found them very helpful for myself and my clients.
So if someone's to come to you for help, you're based in Spain, but you work from a distant as well, and it's just as effective.
It's remote. Yeah, I mean, it's like a Zoom. And I think what happened with COVID is a lot of therapists and counselors and coaches, just by the sheer reality of what happened, have moved online. So and I've been in therapy for years, and I've met my therapist once, but he's based in Washington State. And I feel like he's a great therapist, and I don't see him in person. So I work. I'm actually moving back to Australia, so I'm leaving Spain. I'm not being kicked out, luckily. I'm leaving of my own free will, and I'm heading back to Australia. So I work online.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So and I think the way society is. According to the spiritual teacher Sadhguru, he says that he estimates that suicide in the young is going to increase, in teenagers going to increase dramatically.
Yeah, and it is already. Homicides going down and suicides going up.
Yeah, and I think it's the way that we interact with the social media. The quick dopamine hits and not having any coping strategies. The next thing, the next thing, the next thing, and that's what is. Children are learning, teenagers are learning, and they don't have that coping mechanisms to be able to deal with and process what's happening around them, because they used to instant reward. The brain wants instant reward. So I think you're going to be busy. I think we're both going to be busy over the next few years.
I think sadly that's true, in the sense that I think like you said earlier, I think there's a democratization of knowledge. And that there was a time where, to become a trauma recovery coach, it didn't exist. That was a domain sectioned off for psychologists and psychiatrists. And now, I can take my experience, I can take my lived experience and use it to help people. And the technology part has been good in that regards. But at the same time, I don't see things sadly getting better. I mean, I don't think. I think like they can get better, but I feel the traditional institutions that are meant to serve people in terms of meaning and healing just don't work anymore.
Yeah.
Like religion, has just forget it.
Yeah.
Medical institutions, psychiatric institutions don't work. They're huge conglomerates run by, there's profit motive
Yeah. Yeah.
involved, and they do their best within, like you said, there are a lot of good people in these systems, but I think the systems that are serving people's needs are the same systems that are contributing to the problems. So I think people like yourself, Trevor, and myself, and many other people that are offering an alternative to, I think people are hungry for. And if you look at the statistics, the amount of people now that are taking antidepressants in the UK, it's
Yeah.
like close to 30%. 30, so it's 1 in 3 people are basically saying, my feelings about internally are so difficult to deal with. I need to take a tablet to regulate that.
Mm.
That's antidepressants. Then you look at alcohol, marijuana. Now I think the average time on the screen is 9 hours a day. People are spending
Yeah, it's crazy,
32
isn't it?
years of their life on a screen.
It's
So
crazy.
all of that has an outcome. I mean, all of that reflects something deeper. And the work you do, the work I'm working to do, is to try be honest about that and to say what is going on. Like, how do we get to the point where 1 in 3 people are depressed, where 1 in 4 people are addicted to something? How is that possible? 86% of people hate their jobs or dislike their
Yeah.
jobs. 50% loathe their jobs. And if people spend what most of their life at work, so you spend most of your life doing something that you don't like doing.
Yeah,
So
Gary Vaynerchuk's a social media influencer, and he's really good. And he was saying most people spend their life earning money to buy things to impress people they don't even like. You know, it's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. To
it's.
deal with trauma they're not even aware of, on
I
top
remember
of that.
I remember when
You
I
know?
went through my breakdown, which I now rephrase as a breakthrough. I reframed
Yeah.
it as a breakthrough. I came back to England, and I was in Spain for 6 years, and I went from this great lifestyle to coming back with nothing. And because I was in Spain, they said you can't get any help from the income support, so I couldn't get any money, and I was destitute. And I was in Scotland at one point, and they said, "Well, you could try the soup kitchens," and I'm
Mm,
like, "I can't believe this is happening to me." So I went to the doctors
mm,
because I'm shaking like mad, and he says, "Oh well, you have these, have these." I said, "What are these?" And he give me this. He says, "Yeah, side effects. They can make you feel suicidal." And he says, "Oh, just keep taking them." So I took them for one day, and I went back to
yeah.
the doctor. I said, "Look, you said side effects. There's no side effects." I said, "Suicidal, erectile dysfunction. That's the one that got me." I says, "Right." I says, and he says, I said, "What's going on here?"
Suicide I'm not worried about.
Yeah,
Erectile
suicide.
dysfunction, that's a problem.
That's the one. Yeah, because if I had that,
Yeah,
I'd probably use suicide anyway. But I said,
yeah,
"Look,"
yeah,
I said, "What's going on here?" I said, "This is like." He said, "Oh, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it." I said, "We."
yeah.
I said, "How long
Yeah,
shall
yeah.
I'll be on these for?" He says,
I'm the one on the bridge jumping off,
"Yeah."
so we won't be crossing it. Yeah,
I said, "How long shall I take these for?" He says, "About a year." And I went,
yeah.
and I put them on his desk, and I went, "No." And I just did it myself. And there was an insight there to go, you can do this yourself. But for many people, especially when the with an authoritarian figure, somebody with a white coat on, who go, "Okay, well, you know more than me, and yeah, I'll take that, and then I'll take the next one, then I'll have the side effects, I'll have something." Then they're in the system. They're in the system. They
Mm-hmm.
can't get off. And then they've got
Yeah.
friends, who are maybe on drugs, and before you know it, you're soon in there. So, yeah, it's a complicated problem, but
It is.
you know, with awareness and with guidance from people,
Mm,
that's the way forward. So if people wanted to contact you, you've got a website here, which I'm just going to put up on screen now, which is called
sure.
coachingtraumarecovery.com.
Correct. Yeah.
You've also got a YouTube channel,
Correct.
and that's called Remembering Love. I'll put the
Yep.
links below underneath the
Right.
description. And yeah, it's I mean, it's great for you. We could speak about this for hours, and
Good.
we could definitely, and perhaps we will revisit a more specific topic later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
For sure.
what would you like to finish the podcast on? Is there any words of advice for people that are in that situation?
I think if someone's at a point where they feel like, I want to heal my trauma, what I would say is that, I really hand on heart feel like, there's hope, to have hope in your future, to have faith in your capacity and to have trust in yourself, and your ability to heal. I really believe we're all built to heal, and I think every issue, no matter how dark or arduous or difficult, is everyone's capable of getting back to a good place inside themselves. And it may be hard and it may be difficult, but it is definitely within what's reachable. And I think that message of hope is just something I really want to communicate to people, that it's not false hope and it's not fantasy hope. It's difficult, but it's that things can be different. Things can be better.
And I'm always amazed
to share that. Yeah.
I'm always amazed by people's capacity to overcome extreme adversity. And still come out, and it's incredible. And that's
and also people's ability to support others in extreme adversity. You see people in crisis and people come out and give their hearts to them, and we're really there's so much goodness in the world, and there's so much goodness in people. And what's amazed me in my journey is not just my capacity to heal, but people's capacity to support me, people's capacity to love me and care for me independent of my issues. So I think there's a great hope in our ability to heal, but also a great hope in people's ability to help us. People love helping people. People love seeing people overcome adversity. All the movies we watch, all the things, they're all stories of the hero's journey. Is a journey of not just his overcoming obstacles and ordeals, but the support, the people that we enlist and bring on board of that. And I think that's something that I think is very inspiring.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ewan.
Thank you for having me, Trevor. It's always a pleasure to catch up and talk to you.
I might see you
before we'll catch up soon.
I might see you before you head over to Australia.
You might come to visit me in Australia if you can get through the fortress.
If you can.
Fortress Aussie.
Good luck with that one. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, cheers.
Thanks, Trev. Take care.
So if you want to contact me, I'm on Energy Healing Vibrations is the Facebook. The Instagram is the Healing Vibrations. And if you're interested in coming on a retreat, I do retreats with Samantha Murray, who's also a really good energy healer. And it's very intensive. It's a lot of fun, but it's also very liberating as well. And you get to learn and experience and release trauma, which is what it's all about. And connect with some really good people. So if you're interested in doing that, please get in contact. We have regular events in England and hopefully Europe in 2022, and my address and contact details are here.